Last week, we were looking at Job chapter 6, and we actually were able to finish that. So, Job chapter 6 was concerned with primarily Job's initial response to the friends, where he was reiterating a little bit of what he was experiencing in chapter 3. So, chapter 3 was his first outcry, his first outpouring of the bitterness of his soul, if you will. So chapter 6 kind of began with the same thing, that Job was outpouring the bitterness of his soul, but now he has one of his friends to respond to. Although when you look at the Hebrew, you can also find that he's using the plural for a lot of these things. It doesn't come up as easily in the English, because our verbs aren't as what you would say decline. No, sorry, not decline. Not as conjugated as other things. Some of these other languages, I mean. So with Hebrew, you get it's very easy to tell what verb is for which group of people, in a sense. So Job is not just responding to Eliphaz, he's responding to all the friends, kind of seeing them as a group. So he's condemning all the friends' views because he does not feel comforted by them. And perhaps Job is being a little harsh in this because the friends are not overtly meaning anything harmful to Job. Like they left their lives back home to try and console their friend here. So you would assume that they would be very willing to try and comfort him, but Job is not feeling any comfort at all. He's feeling a little bit attacked. So chapter 6 is him also voicing that opinion, especially to the friends. So as we go into chapter 7 today, we're finding that Job is redirecting himself. So he's not talking to the friends so much anymore, but now he's talking to other people. And again, in the Hebrew, you find that the subjects of the verbs change, so they go from plural addresses to, some of the nouns and verbs will change. So instead of looking at plural, he's now going a bit more to singular. So the things are directed a bit more towards God. But for the first section or so this is chapter 7, verses 1 to 5, it's still kind of up in the air whether or not this is specifically to God, or this is just kind of a general statement. So he might just be voicing something, much like chapter 3 was just him voicing his bitterness. So he wasn't directing that at anyone. He was just speaking things out. So with that in mind, let us begin chapter 7, Job chapter 7, with the first 5 verses. Would anyone like to read? And if you'd like to read, just remember to unmute yourself.
I guess I can.
Thank you.
1 to 5.
1 to 5.
Does not man have hard service on earth? Are not his days like those of a hired man? Like a slave longing for the evening shadows, or a hired man waiting eagerly for his wages? So I have been allotted months of futility, and nights of misery have been assigned to me. When I lay down, I think, how long before I get up? The night drags on, and I toss till dawn. My body is clothed with worms and scabs. My skin is broken and festering.
Pleasant, isn't it? So, any initial thoughts on this?
Given his poor physical condition, must have been quite a while for his health to deteriorate. So.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll also be talking a little bit about the illness and kind of what that might entail. It's tricky thing to try and interpret that specifically.
But I think we've all been in his shoes,
Oh yeah,
you know.
yeah, to varying degrees too. Like I
I
know
mean,
I've never experienced something quite like this, but some people have. And yeah, that's also a good point to bring up. It is a lot of people kind of view Job as an extreme, and they're also kind of view it as what in logic we would call an argument from, or sorry, not logic, a rhetoric, we would call an argument from strength. So because something is so great here, you in a lesser capacity can now fulfill this. So a lot of people just assume that, oh, so much has happened to Job, I don't deserve to express my bitterness over something relatively small, or I'm only going through a little thing now, so I have to work extra hard to keep my faith like Job kept his faith in dire times. It's not a very accurate way to view Job, in the sense that Job is supposed to be the everyman. He's supposed to be the one who is experiencing hardship in this world, and we are supposed to identify with him, not just in terms of devotedness in our faith, but also our need for Christ and the Redeemer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Hello, Laura.
Hello, sorry for getting on late, but here I am.
Hello.
Good morning.
Morning.
No, I find that with a couple of the Bible studies anyway, is that people tend to trickle in a little bit. So don't worry about it.
Okay, thank you.
It's a little aside, but I was pondering this morning how easy it is to get out of the habit and reschedule. As I was jumping in the shower 20 minutes before Bible study, like not something I'd be doing if I had to get to the church.
Mhm.
And it's just, I mean, we've been doing this for so long. It's just, you realize it's really easy to get out of the habit. It'll make it a little more difficult when we get back. As much as we want to get back to doing it in person, we're going to have to work at getting back in the habit.
That's very true.
Yes, we can't attend worship in our pajamas anymore.
No.
Not that I ever do, but I just want you to know, because I think worship is very important. So we too get prepared for worship just like we would on a Sunday morning. But like you said, Linda, there's times where you're short of time. So you kind of just do whatever you have to do immediately and kind of drip dry on your own because nobody else will see you. Right?
That's right.
But yeah, you have to be intentional about worship and sitting down, and we'll have to be more intentional if we get to go back. But I think, again, I just wanted to talk about the fact that we've all experienced what Job has gone through, like in just different degrees. I often have a friend who says to me, "You've never been divorced, you don't know what it's like." But I've experienced loss. So I do know what it's like, not nearly to lose 50% of your relationship, but I do know what loss is like. And same as Job, I don't need to experience, boils or blisters on my skin, but I've certainly felt a sunburn, or I've felt, the flu or whatever, so it's just a matter of degree. And it's not to lose hope in Christ, who's going to redeem us, or he takes us away from all of this. I just want to get there faster. That's all.
Yeah, it to a very large part of it is a matter of degree. But I would also like to just put in extra caution that since we are not experiencing that person's exact experience, because I was kind of saying this with vocation a couple of days ago in the other Bible study, where all the relationships are very unique to you because you're the one in that relationship. So every relationship is viewed through you. So you can't really, so you can have similar vocations. So you can have a vocation of, say, just because there's more women than men here, I'm going to say you have a vocation of motherhood, and you know what that vocation is like, and you can speak with other mothers about all these things. But every single vocation of motherhood is slightly different because you're the mother in your own particular family with your own particular kids, but somebody else has a slightly different relationship because they have different kids and they're a different person who's being the mother. So yes, it is a matter of degree a lot with Job, but we also have to be mindful of the differences and knowing that even though we can understand somewhat what it's like, we don't know exactly what it is. So likeness, but not exactness, I guess you could say. Does that make sense?
Well, I think the other thing is to keep your eye on the solution. Keep your eye under all different kinds of circumstances. Stay connected to the person that can redeem you out of the situation.
Mm.
Like that's the hope we live in.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's what's the ultimate end here? Is to be with God.
Yeah. And this is in part what Job is getting at within this phrasing. So for everyone who just came in, we're in Job chapter 7, verses 1 to 5.
Thank you.
Job chapter 7, verses 1 to 5.
I think you're right, Deborah. I mean, as Christians, that is the hope that we have, but we can't minimize the effect of degree. Sunburn gives us an inkling of what worms and scabs may be like, but doesn't really help us truly understand what he was going through and feeling and the difficulty he would be having in holding on to that hope. The degree is important. It's an important difference.
Well, no, Pastor just explained to you the degree is dependent upon you as a person. The idea, like my friend says to me, you don't know what it's like to be divorced. No, but I know what it's like to be lost. I mean, different degrees, but the idea is, what is the solution? Is life eternally with God. And nobody can ever change the degree in which I experience something because it's personal.
That's true.
You know, and I think that's the point is we can't understand your degree, but we certainly can understand where to keep our eyes focused.
Yeah, I guess my point is that we can't understand the degree that somebody else is experiencing, which also means we can't truly understand how hard it is for them to hold on to that hope.
Yep.
Yeah, we have that hope, but sometimes it's harder to hold on to than others.
Mm-hmm. And that is what Job is getting at here, specifically in this passage, because he's voicing that in verses 1 and 2 there. So does not a man have hard service on earth? Hard service literally means military service. So he's viewing this as something that is very hard and forced. Also keep in mind at this time that there are very few standing armies in the world. So usually your army was whatever able-bodied men you could grab from the fields. So this is a rather sudden and unfamiliar type of service that you're now in and that you are now working extremely hard and now have a threat of death with. So that's how Job is seeing this, is that he's suddenly in a position where you are forced into hardship and in danger of death. But he also expands on this with, are not his days like those of a hired man? So somebody who is hired for a specific labor. This is Job kind of experiencing, yes, I know that I'm in hardship now. There is an end goal, but I want it to end. And the length of this service, the length of this labor is unknown to him. So we have the element of uncertainty in there. And pretty much for everyone, having uncertainty in the mix can be very straining.
But we all live in that uncertainty.
Yes.
I mean, my goal has been always to die at 65. You're past it, and I don't understand why I'm still here, because I really don't want to be here. Right after 65, I kind of did what I wanted to do, right? So I find, we live with that uncertainty. We don't know.
Well, Deborah, that's rather interesting, because I've always thought that I wanted to be alive when Christ came. So I want to live.
No.
Isn't that funny? I've thought that since I was a small child, that I wanted to be alive when he came, that I hadn't died yet.
No, I want eternal rest. I want to sleep.
Ah.
I don't want to sing the heavenly choir or any of that stuff. I want eternal rest.
Well, that's what eternal rest is.
Singing in the heavenly choir?
Yeah.
I don't want any sign-up sheets in heaven. I don't want any of that stuff. I don't want any choir duty. I don't want anything. I just want eternal rest.
Well, that's very interesting,
He
because
promised me eternal
we're going to be resting from our labors. Isn't that what it says?
Yeah.
So he's promised that. I don't want to have to do anything when I get there.
Even like keeping house is, repetitive.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking heaven is going to be different. I don't think there's going to be any dust that we have to dust, or you know what I mean?
I don't know. because dust, since it's basically skin flakes coming off and dying, since that is the body growing and decaying, I guess you could say, we won't be growing, decaying in heaven, because that will be more or less a static state. However, we do know that we're going to be eating of the tree of life, so we're still going to be going through the natural bodily processes. I just kind of wonder, would that also mean having skin cells flake off of you? I don't know.
Me either.
Yeah,
Well, maybe, Pastor, maybe whatever we do will be effortless, because we are perfect. In perfect health, we're never going to be tired.
Oh, absolutely.
Right?
It's not that we're just going to be asleep for eternity. That's not what we're promised. We're promised that we would be clothed with immortality, so that we can continue to live with God forever. So this is living according to how he wants us to live.
Well, it's rather interesting when he talks about heaven being, rest from your labors. But there is not going to be any night. It's only going to be daytime, so we're not going to be sleeping.
Yeah. Well, you can also consider it to be somewhat of a Sabbath rest. So the Sabbath rest was like, to take this away from the Pharisees, who just wanted you to just kind of sit at home. The Sabbath rest is that in which you do good. So Jesus was healing on the Sabbath. He was raising people from the dead on the Sabbath. He was also advising that if your animal falls into a well on the Sabbath, you get it out. So it's not that we're going to be completely immobile or anything like that. There's still we're just not going to be in labor. So as Job is saying, that like with hard service and the hired hand for labor, these are things that you don't necessarily want to do, but you have to do to earn your keep here in this world. When we find ourselves in new heavens, new earth, we're still going to be at work, but it's not going to be work for us. This is the thing that you're going to want to do. So much as the heavenly choirs are just singing out of their jubilation for Christ's presence, that's going to be more with us. So we're not going to be signing up for times or for choir practice and all that. It's just going to be spontaneous. Let's just join in the heavenly choir and sing the praises of our God.
We'll all have
Just do a
perfect
theme song.
pitch. We'll be perfect.
Yeah, coming out of that situation, look at the other side of things. Within this world, what does Job have to look forward to? Well, he's still suffering here in this world. He still finds himself in hard labor and just basically longing for it all to end. So for Job, his idea of this is basically an eternal rest. So him staying in the grave forever. So when he's saying in verse 2, like a slave longing for the evening shadows, or a hired man waiting eagerly for his wages, putting this in the context of what he's already said, he is quite hoping for death, so he does not have to experience this world any longer. And when you and this kind of gives you a new take on the verse in Romans 6, where it's the wages of sin is death. Well, now Job is saying the wages, that he's hoping that the wages of his good life is death, so that he no longer has to experience life. Kind of the flip side of that. But thankfully, as the dialogue continues, as I note here in the second point, Job will have hope that the labor ends, rather than, because his hope here in this specific context, because he's still kind of hopeless. His hope here is that he will enter into the grave, so that he no longer has to experience the hardship. So he's kind of seen as death as the reward, but as the dialogue continues, his view shifts a little bit, so that he's just hoping that the labor ends in this life, rather than experiencing death necessarily. Very, very existentialist type of ideas, I guess.
Back to my point, well, anyway, my goal has always been to be 65 and end living in this physical world, because I'm looking for the joy of death, because I would get eternal rest. And I have to, the uncertainty of when that's going to happen. I always had dreamed it was going to happen at 65, but unfortunately it hasn't. So I'm like Job. I'm looking forward to the death. So I will be with Christ, and I won't have to deal.
But are you looking forward to death, or are you looking forward to life with Christ?
I'm looking forward to life with Christ, but I
There
know
we go.
death. Well, death.
There, that's right.
The death is the way I get there.
But the death is the horrible thing, though.
No, for some
And
people,
we're
No,
still
for
with
everyone it
Christ
is.
even here, right?
no.
We have a life with Christ while we're here.
Because death itself is the consequence of sin, and it is itself something absolutely horrible. This is basically Paul's point where 1 Corinthians 15, where he's saying, death, where is your victory? Where is your
Oh, where is your sting?
That's where's
he's
your
saying
sting.
that the sting of sin is.
Death.
Sorry, I'm mixing this up in my head. I'm
Wages
actually
of
just
sin is death, and we have no other option but to die.
There we go.
And I don't have the sting of it because I don't think it's terrible. I'm looking forward to it because
No, the sting of death is sin, and the power of the sin is the law. And then Paul goes on, but thanks be to our God, he gives us the victory through the Lord Jesus Christ. So the point is that Paul's trying to make is that death is not the end goal. It is never the good thing, because it is that which is the consequence of sin. So insofar as sin is evil, so is death. So the victory truly is life with Christ, not death itself.
I think it's a quandary we all have, and I can't quote the passages, but is it Paul that talks about wanting to be in heaven with God, but having work to do here on earth, and that conflict between the two?
Oh yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. So that's Philippians chapter 1, and he's saying whether it's better to die now and be with the Lord, or to remain here on earth and to spread the gospel to people. And he's saying, well, if I had my choice, I'd rather be dead, because then I'd be with God. Because to him, death is nothing. But the point is that he would rather be with the Lord. But while he's still in this body and life, he's going to continue on in the Lord, much as he would continue on after death. But in this world, his being in the Lord means basically spreading the word of the gospel so that others might come to faith and have the life-saving faith to be in the Lord. So whether he's in the body or out of it, he's with the Lord.
Pastor?
Yep.
My dear mother was in a nursing home for five and a half years, having had a stroke before she died. And near the end of the time she was there, like the last year, she made some comments to me that I thought, oh my goodness, sort of like, why am I still here? What good am I doing? People waiting on her, and she's always been the one waiting on others. And I said, well, you can pray, and that sort of like, God's not finished with you yet.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So it's like St. Paul says, wherever we are, we're with the Lord, whether it's here or in heaven, because he is with us.
Oh, absolutely.
We just need to be reminded.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's the difficult thing, is when we're looking to death as an end in itself, much as Job is doing in chapters 3 and also now, I guess, but he is not searching for God per se, although he's still with God. He still has faith. This is his confession, chapter 6, where is it? 6 verse 10, where he says, then I would still have this consolation, my joy and unrelenting pain, that I had not denied the words of the Holy One. So he's rejoicing that he is still in the faith in this life, but he's still viewing death as an end in itself. Not that death is itself a good thing, but that he views it preferable to being in pain.
One thing that Job never did contemplate was to commit suicide. I wonder if he was tempted.
I don't know. Hard to say. And I'm saying that it's hard to say because we currently have within the field of psychology, not that I know this terribly well, but that there are different degrees which you can say is suicidal behavior. So kind of wishing for death or saying that you would rather be dead is suicidal behavior, but that doesn't mean necessarily that you're suicidal, that you would actually kill yourself.
Right.
So Job definitely has suicidal thoughts, but it's not necessarily that he's suicidal. And so yeah, it's hard to say whether or not he's he was ever seriously considering suicide at any point in time. He doesn't say he does, but.
No. I think it's because of his faith that he wouldn't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and yeah, that was also chapter 6, just before verses 10, and so verses 8 to 9, that his request and hope was for God to destroy Job himself. So Job didn't want to commit suicide, to go against the law of the Lord and take his own life. He rather God just take him sooner rather than later. Much, much sooner rather than later. Which, yeah, it just signals that he is in hardship and he does not know how to deal with some of the things in this world. So he's rather that enter into a state of death rather than continue in life. Which, kind of a sad thing. But, any other thoughts kind of on this before we move to verse 3? Chapter 7, verse 3. Okay. So chapter 7, verse 3. So I have been allotted months of futility and nights of misery have been assigned to me. This doesn't seem figurative. Job uses a lot of figurative speech, so it's very hard to try and nail down exactly what anyone is saying in the book of Job, in the sense that if they're using a metaphor or a figure of speech anywhere, then it's going to slightly affect how literal we can take this. But it seems very reasonable to assume that Job is being extremely literal here, because he's not using any immediate metaphor to say that, or hyperbole, we could say, a hyperbole being the figure of speech where you greatly exaggerate what has gone before. So Job's not saying, I've been in pain for decades or anything like that. He's saying months of futility have been allotted to me, which it does seem reasonable, because it would probably take from at least the first affliction that he's experienced, probably a few weeks for the information to leak out to the friends, and then also for the friends to arrange their business affairs so that they can continue on while they're away. That would also probably take a little bit of time, and then for them to travel down to Job, that would also be a few more weeks. So, and then they're sitting in silence for another week. So I would say probably it's been at least 2 months since the first affliction.
I think the other thing is that, if you lose your spouse or you lose your family or you lose someone close to you, there's other people, but he doesn't have anyone, no servants, no family, no, his wife sort of seems to be somewhere in the background, to just do daily chores, daily from one day to the next kind of thing. So to him, it's futility, because anything he does have to do, he's doing it all by himself, and he has to do it over and over. And it's just like, to him, it's futile, because he thinks, why am I doing this? Why am I making any attempt at all? It's futility in this point is more like hopelessness. Not that he's without hope God, but without hope of anything he does making any difference.
Mm-hmm. And since his hope is basically an end to his life, as so he says, then trying to continue in this life seems somewhat, not necessarily pointless, but difficult to do.
without purpose.
Mm-hmm. Looking.
So back in that time, which was one of you say Job was one of the earliest or the earliest book of the Bible. So in ancient times, did they have any physicians?
No.
I don't think so.
The closest thing you could probably get at this point in time would be a priest, because the priest would be looking after certain bodily ailments,
Uh-huh.
sometimes assuming that these are spiritually induced. So you can actually even see this a little bit in the Old Testament, where it is up to the Levites. So you see this in Leviticus. It's up to them to identify skin diseases, and
Oh, like leprosy.
you can come back into the community.
Right.
Sorry, what were you saying?
Like leprosy?
Yes.
The priest, yeah.
I don't like. I don't use the word leprosy because odds are it's not what we think is leprosy, because modern day that term is used for neurological disorder. So this is where the
Hansen's
neurons,
disease?
yeah.
Yeah.
So basically it is due to your nervous system breaking down that you lose feeling in your extremities and also your skin, so things also don't get taken care of and they start rotting away. But with infectious skin diseases, that's just kind of a catch-all term. So leprosy in the Bible is kind of a catch-all term for these types of things. So, or infectious skin diseases.
Anything infectious.
Yeah.
I think Louise has a point though about the futility of it. I mean, if we think in terms of comparing our purpose here on earth to be serving others and compare that to being in heaven, if we have no one to serve or no ability to serve, then what is our purpose here on earth?
Like it's what my mother was thinking.
Mm.
And I just said to her, well, you have time to pray. You know, some other people might be so busy they're not praying as much as they should. And she acknowledged that.
And I would also say that there's another element to it that people don't necessarily think of, because usually when we're contemplating these things and we're saying, well, what can we do? So we still want to do something. And this would just be the law that is written upon our hearts, calling us to do this or that, the other thing. We try and see, well, how useful am I to others? That kind of belies the point of, well, God has made you for this, not so that you can serve him or give him anything, but just so that he could love you. So even within this world, even when you can't do anything, you can still receive the love of others. You can still receive their works for you. And you can still thank and praise your God for it. So the prayers also don't have to be necessarily you trying to make sure that God knows of all these problems here or there. They can still be prayers of thanksgiving that you have received many things in this life and you continue to receive them. I guess what I'm hinting at is the communal aspect is the important thing, not necessarily you working for someone else, but that you are working for somebody else and they're also working for you. So you're living in communion with other people. That seems to be the important thing.
Job doesn't really have a lot to be thankful for right now.
Yeah.
I mean, much as he's still thankful for that connection he has with God, there's not a whole lot else.
No. Well, that was the point.
The futility of it all.
Yeah. Yeah, that was basically Satan's original point was, once you take away all the blessings in this world, since Job doesn't have anything to be thankful for, then he won't like you anymore, God. So God said, okay, take away all this stuff. And then Satan says, well, he still has his person, so I need to take away his person. So God says, okay, well, you can afflict his flesh, but you have to leave his life. So Satan goes out, afflicts Job's flesh. Job can't be thankful for his health anymore or anything good or worthy in that. So what does Job have left but his life?
The devil just doesn't get that connection between us and God.
No. And yeah, so can we still be joyful when we have absolutely nothing left? Or can we still be can we still be joyful and thankful to God when we have nothing left?
Still
Can we
have him.
be the one who enjoys in merely having a relationship rather than seeing prosperity in a relationship?
I think sometimes that's what we need him the most.
Mm.
When we have nothing.
And kind of thinking off the top of my head, in a way, I think that is a little bit, and excuse me if this is coming across as insensitive, I really don't mean it to be, but I think it is also somewhat with the same situation with those that we have lost. We no longer have their presence with us. They're no longer here to do things for us specifically. We're no longer able to do things specifically for them in their bodies, but we still have the relationship sustained in God who keeps them alive in the faith. So the relationship still exists, which we can be thankful for, but the nature of the relationship is very, very different.
So, Pastor, when we have Holy Communion with our fellow believers, we are also having it with the believers in heaven, right?
Mm.
And we just need to be reminded every time we have communion, we are in fellowship with those that have died in faith.
With angels and archangels and with the whole company of heaven.
Heaven, right. I think sometimes we forget that.
Hmm.
Unfortunately, I'm going to have to leave this Bible study in 5 minutes because I have another Zoom call for my business.
Okay.
So I'll watch the rest of it later.
Okay. Yeah. So months of futility, nights of misery. Yeah, the general sense is that they are empty. There is no purpose to these. They merely continue. Especially when we get into verse 4, when it says, when I lie down, I think, how long before I get up? The night drags on and I toss till dawn. So Job has some insomnia, making things worse. Probably in part due to his physical condition. His skin is broken and festering after all, but also possibly grief. So yeah, he says in verse 14, even then you frighten me with dreams and terrify me with visions. So these things are not terribly happy. Going to sleep, being in sleep, means that he is just experiencing hardship. I don't know. Has anyone actually experienced insomnia? I've never really been in that situation.
Yes.
You can have insomnia if your health is poor.
Mm.
Like if your iron is low, you don't sleep well. So because of his physical condition, he doesn't get rest.
Mm.
Occasionally, not very often, I've had experienced insomnia where I just wasn't able to fall asleep. I don't know, thinking back on what might have been the reason, but fortunately, it's only happened a few times.
Mm.
It can make you old in a hurry.
Well, sometimes if you have a pain, like when I broke my arm, if it was a gnawing ache, it was hard to fall asleep,
Mm.
and you take a pain pill, right?
Mm.
Well, some of us have to take medication just to go to sleep.
Mm.
You call that insomnia?
Yep.
We call it difficulty sleeping, or some of us only need a little bit of sleep. You know,
It wears you down.
pardon me?
It wears you down.
That's David. He's listening too, Pastor.
Oh, yeah. No, so I think there's, I was going to ask, I certainly think there's times that in your life. I know when, as a student studying for exams, I don't think I slept. I did take pills to go to sleep. I take pills today to go to sleep. But
well, I take melatonin. That's helped me go to sleep.
So
yep.
Even with that, you only get 4 or 5 hours sleep. But I don't think I think sleep is an incredible waste of time. So, but anyway, I don't know. Is that insomnia? I think,
No,
and I certainly know that when my father passed, my mother didn't sleep. And it's a way your body just cannot handle all the stresses it's going through right now. Your mind can't slow down or calm down to go to sleep. Is that insomnia?
It's a type of insomnia, yes.
So I think many of us have experienced it different times in our lives.
For different reasons, yes.
For different
You were
reasons.
getting 4 hours sleep. You were getting an awful lot of sleep compared to some other things.
Well, yeah, I'm happy with 4 hours sleep, but it doesn't always happen to come at the same time or whatever. But
Well, when you can only get about 2 hours sleep at a time, then it really gets to you.
Insomnia, no sleep at all?
Well, you'd go to sleep and wake up in about maybe an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours was a lot. When I got 5 hours, I was happier than a clam.
I have the similar problem. I don't have any trouble going to sleep, but semi-regularly I'll wake up in the middle of the night and I cannot shut my brain off.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm getting back to sleep, right?
Yeah.
Now that I'm getting back to 4 hours sleep, yeah, that happens to me. I can't do the rest of the night.
So from all this, I'm gathering that people have a basic idea of what Job went through.
Yes.
Yes.
Lack of sleep is debilitating.
Oh, yeah.
It can affect your mental health too if it's prolonged.
Mm-hmm.
My sister-in-law had a very, very rough time when she was in menopause. For 2 weeks, she wasn't able to sleep, and it affected her mental health. So sleep is important.
Yeah. So yeah, with Joe being in a time where there is no medication to deal with this, or at least to help with it anyways, and this is going on for a couple of months. Yeah, it does sound like it would wear him down a bit.
Well, your body has things to do while you're sleeping. Like there's functions that go on in your body and your brain when you sleep that maintains your health, that maintains your mental and physical health. So without that, it really does affect you in a physical way. And I think that's what Joe was talking about, is physically his lack of sleep is affecting him.
Yeah. Yeah, he does seem to.
And we're all human beings. So I think we get the idea, we're surprised that we wouldn't suffer the same afflictions Job felt. I mean, we're one human race. So his afflictions, we would still we have experienced them, just different degrees.
Yes.
Like all of the situation he's in, it's just different degrees. We've experienced the same kind of, we're subject to the same human afflictions he has been subject to, I think. Just to different degrees. But our idea, again, is to stay focused on Christ.
Mm-hmm. But what Job is trying, and I'm talking about like the book of Job is trying to do at this point in time, is to try and not downplay the despair that we're actually in, but to admit it and to allow us to embrace that it is known not only by other human beings, but by God himself. Yeah. So, continuing on to the more cringy part of this in Job chapter 7, verse 5, where Job is saying, "My body is clothed with worms and scabs. My skin is broken and festering." Clothed with worms. Yeah, the word specifically, I was looking this up in Hebrew. So it's kind of a worms, maggots type of idea, not simply just a worm, but infected by insects. Sorry, yeah, it's one of the cringier things. So yeah, it is just covered with worms and maggots, which implies not only that he has the skin disease, then it's not really healing at all, but that there is a lack of any treatment whatsoever of it. So there's no.
Still use maggots in the hospital for certain healing conditions.
Hmm?
They use maggots in the hospital for certain health issues.
Because they eat only dead skin.
Skin, that's right. So there's still.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean at this point in time that they're welcome or necessarily.
No,
healthy.
I don't. I think it's messy, but I mean, there's still a positive. They do serve a purpose.
Think if we talked about before how he was probably sitting in a garbage dump, which kind of means that if he's got a skin infection, obviously there's going to be an increase in infection. There's going to be the maggots. And so, I mean, he's in a garbage dump.
Mm. Yeah. And since he is covered with maggots and that signaling that he's not receiving proper medical care, that means that he's not really being cared about at all by anyone else. So if he's without medical knowledge to, as most people were at this point in time, if he's without medical knowledge, he would be unable to do anything for himself. So yeah, it's more indicative of his relationship with other people and his general state than it is this good or not? Yeah. But also mention when he's talking about his skin broken and festering, man, the Hebrew of that is really tough to try and translate. Because essentially what he's talking about is that it is both healing and destroying itself. So it's trying to repair, but then it's also breaking apart, and then so it's in a constant back and forth. So I also kind of wonder if Satan has just kind of left him already, or if Satan is still trying to perpetuate the particular illness. If Job's skin is trying to heal itself and then it suddenly just breaks apart again, and then, yeah, so, yeah. But yeah, I know I've mentioned it many times before, but the case of people being in, say, the hospital with a chronic illness, they've had it for years, maybe only months, but they've had it for an extended period of time. It does wear you down, not only physically, but also mentally and spiritually.
Just what I was thinking is that your physical medical condition creates worry in your mental facility of, if you can't do anything about it, then you worry about it. If you can do something but don't know what, or it's not possible to do anything about it, it certainly does affect your mental state of mind. I mean, if you're talking about mindfulness, this condition is with him day and night. It's not something you can go off and, well, I'll think about that tomorrow. It's with him physically.
Yeah. I wasn't really thinking about it before, but back when Satan first afflicted Job, it was a very personal affliction. In chapter 1, Satan kind of just orchestrated various groups to steal all of Job's animals, also to a wind to blow down the house that killed Job's children. But in Job chapter 2, the wording is, or at least the phrasing of it, is a bit more personal, where Satan comes out of the presence of the Lord to touch Job's flesh. And it seems that this particular thing is a bit more personal than, say, some of the losses that Job has experienced, because the other losses, they were done outside of his person. Job can even shut himself off from that. But how can you possibly escape mentally or physically from a disease within your own flesh?
Does it come back to the desire to do something? I mean, if as horrid as the first afflictions were with physical health, he could eventually work through it, improve his situation again. But if he's physically incapable of doing anything, then how can he recover in any way, shape, or form?
Yeah, and then I guess the external losses come into play at that point, because if he's unable to physically do anything, does he have anyone else in his life who could actually take care of him? So he's other people can't help him, and then he's incapable of helping himself.
Well, it's not even that people can't help him, but people won't help him because their lack of medical knowledge. If someone is that ill with those many visible ailments, they don't want to go anywhere near them.
Gee, that sounds familiar. We don't want to go near anybody right now either.
Right. Things haven't changed much, have they? Stay away from me. Stay away from me.
Yeah.
You know, it's like we get nervous if anyone comes even too close with us when we're outside. Like, no, you stay over there. Keep your distance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say that that's basically what's happening with Job, not necessarily because people don't want to get sick, but they don't want God mad at them, because that would be the assumption at the time that, oh, look, fireballs came down and destroyed Job's sheep. God probably hates him. I better not mix with that guy.
Don't want to be tarred with the same brush. Is that it?
Well, trying to think of the best way. Okay, so don't know how much of Leviticus you all remember, because it's such a riveting book. How can you forget any of it? But with a lot of the rules given to the Israelites, especially with cleanliness laws, a lot of it is about removing from yourself all that might infect or all that might cause you to become polluted, become unclean. So not only are you to distance yourself from that which is sinful, but you're supposed to distance yourself from that which represents sin, represents death. So you're not supposed to go near a dead body, not only because of the physical ailments that it might cause within the people, but you're also not supposed to go next to a dead body because it represents death, the effects of sin, the consequences of sin. So you're not supposed to be with that dead body. And anyone who does come into contact with it, they must clean themselves and remain in a period of isolation for a while before they can rejoin the community. Same thing with infectious skin diseases. You're supposed to remove those individuals from the community, keep them outside of the community, and only once they have healed can they be brought back in, and then you would have to go through a ceremony with the Levitical priest who would then okay you to come back fully within the community. This is also why you find lepers in the New Testament constantly being outside of the cities, out on the roads, because that's the only place that they can go and receive alms so that they can live. Not just because that they can infect people physically, but also spiritually. Because the idea was if you have some sort of physical illness that you're also representative of sin or being affected by sin. You can also take this to extremes with a lot of the other cleanliness laws in the Old Testament. Even yeast, you can take this into account with that. Is yeast sinful? No. You can use yeast. We can have it in bread and all that. But the idea that it can infect an entire loaf and that it can cause an entire loaf to rise is representative of sin. So a little yeast affects the entire lump, or a little sin pollutes the entire body. So you don't want to be connected with that which is a sin, but you want to excise it from you.
It wasn't even in those days that if you were a beggar, you had to be outside the gates, because probably the same kind of thing as you wouldn't be in the best of health either.
I don't remember that any particular law like that.
Well, not so much a law, but whenever they describe it, they describe people of that condition or that fate of being by the gate or outside the gate of the city.
Yeah, I'm thinking that might be something else because the gates are the high traffic areas.
Well, no, I appreciate that, but a marketplace would be a high traffic area too, but it's not like they seem to be allowed in there. It seemed to be, they always talk about them being outside the gate. But to the lepers is that they wouldn't be in the best of health. So, well, you stay out there, we'll feel sorry for you out there, but you can't come in and join us.
I'd say that's more lepers, that like people with particular conditions, than it is beggars in general. because you find quite a few beggars inside the city, mostly, and they're beggars mainly because they're unable to take care of themselves, being lame or crippled in some way. Yeah. I can't think of anything specifically that would tie, like a general case of begging to the gates or being outside the city.
Okay.
And I wanted, and I would like to, I just wanted to keep that in mind, because we're not saying that poverty is a case of sinfulness in that sense. It is more of a, we find it being more of a physical manifestation, a supernatural manifestation, than we find it as a socioeconomic class thing.
But they did believe that if somebody was lame from birth or deaf from birth or whatever, that the question was, well, who sinned?
Yeah.
So they,
Oh no, yeah, and that's fair. But the fellow, because that came up in John chapter 9, but the fellow that they were actually talking about was still inside the city.
Okay.
I think, and this is my assumption. My assumption is that the sin had already been atoned for, in the sense that there would have already been sacrifices for it. Like, oh, if this person was born lame, then they would have already cleansed him at the temple according to tradition, not according to tradition, according to the Old Testament law, and also that the parents would have been covered by any sacrifices that would be done at the temple. But when you have a persistent skin disease, let's say, then you would still need to be taken away until you knew that those sins were forgiven and the skin disease itself was taken away.
I wasn't thinking so much of the poverty aspect, but of the just not being able to take care of yourself, not be able to have the facility to be clean or to be well fed or to be in state of health.
Mm. Yeah, I think there would be the social stigma that might be a cause of sin, but that's not necessarily what any of the laws were made about.
Okay.
Yeah.
every time I think or read on those laws of cleanliness and stuff, it always just hits me as to how advanced they were medically. I mean, this is still the process we're using today. I mean, it was instigated for religious purposes, but really, they were way ahead medically.
Yeah. Now, you don't really find too many of these types of ideas, like the Levitical laws quarantining people. You don't find too much of that in other ancient cultures. It was mostly Israel. So you kind of go like, haha, God has given his people medical knowledge, and sort of. But I think it's actually more telling of our own times, how we've dealt with these things. I'm sorry, I'm going down a rabbit hole with this, but within our own time, we find that the best solution that we had to a novel coronavirus, where we did not have a predisposed immunity to it, some viruses that we discover, well, some people are just immune to it off the bat, but we had no idea if anybody was immune to this thing. So all of us went into isolation. We all quarantined ourselves. We all followed the same basic principles that people have followed for centuries and centuries and centuries. Thus, kind of just being in the same historical spot we were 2,000 or even 3,000 years ago. But the initial hope was that science would save us. And that was the idea of our secular culture today, was that science would save us from these things. And of course, people have now gotten hope from their God of science by having this vaccine suddenly present among them. But really, the human situation has not changed. The focus of our hope has shifted from God himself, which was the hope of all the people affected by historical plagues, was that you would still maintain your faith, you would still do all your private devotions, whether or not you can join together in a community. But it was still very much focused on God as the center of our salvation, whereas today there has been more of a spiritual shift away from God towards the idol of science, where the vaccination would save you. But I digress.
Well, you were talking about Leviticus, and I opened it up, and it came open at chapter 15, which is talking about discharges causing uncleanliness.
Oh, yeah.
And 16 is the Day of Atonement. So it was definitely felt that medical condition needed God's forgiveness.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. It also kind of goes back with what I mentioned, I think very, very briefly, where the priest would be the one responsible, like a priest within a community would also be the default medical practitioner.
Mm.
And this is not only true for Israel, but also for a lot of ancient cultures. Was this is where you get the idea of a witch doctor. They were not only the ones who were dealing with the spiritual, but also the physical ailments. So they just kind of, not necessarily conflate the terms, but you just kind of join them. Yeah. Yes, yeah. So the idea of illness being related to uncleanliness has, like spiritual uncleanliness has been as a long tradition. So not only were the Levitical priests responsible for the spiritual health, but also the physical health in some respects of the Israelite community. Too bad for Job that Levitical laws won't come around for quite a while. Any other thoughts on the section, verses 1 to 5 of Job chapter 7?
No.
All righty. I have a lot more points in the next section, so I don't think we're going to get to all of this, but before time runs out. I'll just mention that verses 1 to 5, kind of in general, Job speaking not to the friends, not necessarily to God, although possibly to God, possibly a lament. The next section, verses 6 to 10, is Job now addressing God. This is the first time anyone besides Satan actually addresses God. A whole 5 chapters until we get to somebody addressing God for the first time, except for Satan. So, yeah, Job is the only person in the book who actually speaks directly to God. This includes all the servants, though understandably the servants don't get a lot of speaking time, so would they actually address God? Or would you find a recording of them addressing God? Job's wife, she only speaks for 1 verse, and she's talking directly to Job, but talking to Job about God. The 3 friends, and also Elihu, who pops up in chapter 32. All four of them speak about God, but they never speak to God. And each one of them has multiple chapters ascribed to them, but they don't speak to God. Job is the only one who talks to God.
Is this the thing that with in the Old Testament where you had to be a specific person to go towards the altar of God?
I wouldn't say that, no.
Because when they were talking about John, Elizabeth's husband,
Oh,
when he was looking
Zacharias.
after Zacharias, so he was looking after the inner altar, which was his privilege for that specific day. And because he didn't believe the angel, he couldn't speak until John was born. So that's what I was talking about, of that specifically it was sort of a hierarchy of who could talk specifically to God, or be in presence of God, or be in the presence of what they felt was God.
Well, in the case of Zacharias, or I believe, trying to remember what the translation has it as. It's in English. English works differently than Greek or Hebrew. So Zechariah. Okay, they have it as Zechariah. Actually, Zacharias and Zechariah, same name actually, oddly enough. Okay, so Zechariah was in the Levitical priesthood. And the idea of him being able to do that, and only him at that particular point in time, has more to do with the Levitical priesthood and what it represented than anything else.
But in the Old Testament, the ordinary person wasn't allowed to go into that altar section.
Mm-hmm. But that didn't mean that they were the only ones who could pray.
No, I know that. But
oh, sorry.
Job was sort of having a personal discussion with God, which I think is different than prayer in the Old Testament.
How do you mean?
Well, I think usually when we pray, we ask for things, or we're thankful for things. But Job was actually having a conversation with God, which I think is a little bit different than prayer. It's how I consider prayer now, but I don't think back then people would feel that they would be allowed to have a conversation with God. It wasn't, I don't know. I'm not expressing it very well, but I think Job's relationship with God was a whole lot different than most people in those days' relationship with God.
Okay.
It was more on a personal level with God, that he could have a conversation and say some of the things that he did. I don't think the ordinary person in those days would say that in a prayer to God. They would maybe complain to God. They would maybe ask for whatever they needed, or be thankful for whatever they had. But I think that's different than having an intimate conversation with someone.
I'm not seeing how it is different though. So I'm afraid I'm not understanding your point. So I'm sorry. I don't think I'm getting it.
Oh, it's okay.
Okay. So
would you say there are times when you have a more intimate conversation with God than others?
I think so.
Yeah, there are different times when you would.
Right. And I think that's what Louise is saying. She's having more, that this Job is having more of a real personal, intimate relationship or conversation with God than just praying and singing praises and, and prayer requests.
But
yeah, I think you get what I mean, Deborah, is that, you know, it's one thing to pray for good crop, but another thing to have this personal, intimate discussion with God that you maybe wouldn't necessarily have with even anybody else.
Right.
but again, that's just what I think prayer is. That's
Well,
always been what prayer is.
well, that's what prayer is to me. That's what prayer is to, say, Deborah or other people in our group.
Mm.
But I don't know if that's something that someone who follows the laws of set out.
But Pastor, we
have,
got to that understanding of what prayer is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think as a child, like we're talking about the meat and potatoes of Scripture, right, or the milk and honey, right? I think as a child, we prayed just out of habit,
or teaching,
or yeah, we know that God answers all our prayers, and it's a conversation with Him. But I think our intimacy with Him wasn't as mature as it is now. Our understanding.
Well, yes, you grow into the relationship, but that's not dependent on being of a particular person per se.
But you can be someone's acquaintance and discuss the weather and general health, but with a friend, you have a much more intimate relationship that you can discuss things more personally. And Job is definitely having personal discussions with God.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a general request that he's making in his prayer.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty specific.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean that the other friends or Elihu can't also do that. It is not particular to Job and Job alone that he is able to hold this conversation. The conversations can be held by anyone, but it's a personal choice for them not to do so. In the case of Zechariah, he was acting in his priestly role, that he was able to come into a particular position within the temple. But that does not mean that God could not have come to him in any other way. Nor could Zechariah not have had that conversation in a completely different area. So kind of case in point with Mary, God came to her speaking, basically delivering a message through the angel Gabriel. And Mary was able to voice her utmost concerns with the angel Gabriel's. Like, she didn't know what kind of message this was, so she was able to say, "What are you talking about?" But yeah, it doesn't necessarily depend on the Levitical priesthood. The priesthood was more about who could stand in place for you so that you could have the forgiveness of sins. But
So
for a straightforward prayer conversation, that's.
I guess my point then is, why are you saying it's just Job who has that talk directly to God?
Because he's the only one who actually has this faith that he would actually do so. The other ones are voluntarily not talking to God.
I'm thinking of the instance, and I can't remember which prophet it is that wrestles with God.
This was Jacob.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's pretty personal. I mean, was he having a discussion with God at that point?
Depends what you define a conversation as. I guess you could also say having the wrestling bout was a conversation.
Are we talking about degrees again? I
guess that's what I'm talking about.
We've come to understand that we can have a close personal relationship with God, and that affects our prayer life. But there's that comes with the understanding of the degree of love that we receive from God, and that we can rail against him and complain. That's part of the relationship. That's part of what our prayer life can be. He's not going to reject us. But there are other people who believe, they have faith, but they don't quite have that confidence. and full understanding of God's love to feel that they can communicate in that way, that they have that permission to complain.
I think that's what I'm meaning, is that since Jesus came to earth and taught us about forgiveness and love, I'm just saying, was it different in the Old Testament, where it was that, was there that same understanding of trust and love and with God, that they could complain?
Or was it just a formalized set
Well,
of things to do?
In the Old Testament, yes, absolutely there was. These are the Psalms. The Psalms were the prayers that you pray.
Yes.
About a
And it
third
was
of the Psalms are laments and complaints.
True, true.
But it was even Jesus that gave us the Lord's Prayer of how to pray specifically to God.
Yeah. I'm afraid I'm missing the point.
We were talking about who had conversations with God back in the Old Testament, I guess is what we started out with.
Okay.
So I guess the point is that now and then there's really no difference. There's some people that have the faith and confidence in God's love to have that close personal relationship, and others that don't have that confidence to talk to God in that manner.
I think that's what I'm trying to say, is that his friends maybe didn't have that same relationship with God as Job did.
Well, yes, they don't have the same relationship, but it's more them turning to their own ways than any virtue that would be of them, which would have been the case with Zechariah, because he was given a specific appointment. So he had, by virtue of his office, that's why he was able to get in such a position in the temple.
Okay.
But yeah, all people are called in faith to have faith and to come to the Lord God, the Lord their God, in prayer.
Yes. Only through the Holy Spirit.
Okay. Well, I think we'll stop here because we've ran out of time. And then we'll just kind of begin next week addressing the same type of thing, because I'll go through what type of this, or a little bit more in why it's important for Job to be the one who is directly addressing God and what that means for all his speeches. So I'll delve into that a little bit more deeply beginning of next time.
Maybe that's not what I'm getting. Maybe that's what I'm not getting.
Okay. So we'll look into this next time, and hopefully we'll try and sort all this stuff out.
Okay.
Odds are with some of this stuff, it is kind of the language or method of communication that's the issue, rather than the actual conflict of ideas.
Okay. It's very interesting to be able to discuss the Bible in depth. So we appreciate the venue.
Oh, yeah.
Opportunity.
Oh yeah, and we'll get into the an unrecorded conversation right after this. So we'll close the class in prayer, and then if you have anything else, anything else that came up during our talk here this morning, we can bring it up privately in a moment. So for prayer, let's see. Trying to think what might be a good one. Since we talked about sleep a little bit, we'll go with Psalm 3. Psalm 3. Let us pray. O Lord, how many are my foes? How many rise up against me? Many are saying of me, God will not deliver him. But you are a shield around me, O Lord. You bestow glory on me and lift up my head. To the Lord I cry aloud, and he answers me from his holy hill. I lie down and sleep. I wake again because the Lord sustains me. I will not fear the tens of thousands drawn up against me on every side. Arise, O Lord, deliver me, O my God. Strike all my enemies on the jaw. Break the teeth of the wicked. From the Lord comes deliverance. May your blessing be on your people.
Amen.
O Lord, when we are in distress, when we are in terrible trouble, much like how Job was, we find ourselves in bodily distress and spiritual distress and mental distress. We might even enter into times of insomnia when we lie down but we don't sleep. But we know, O Lord, that you sustain us. Bring us forward as we live our lives. Keep us in the hope that you have given us in our Lord Christ Jesus, that as we continue forth in suffering, we have your promise of everlasting life. In the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, we pray. Amen.